And welcome back to this Bible study in the book of Matthew 24. And you may be jumping in and instantly going, Jason, are you re-recording yesterday's message from church? I'm not going to say I'm re-recording yesterday's message from church. Let me give a little context. I say it all the time. One of the things I do is I want to leave something like for my kids, like part of the legacy that I leave behind. And then when it comes to being in the church, and I had a great conversation with Brother Randy Richardson up in Kentucky when I was up there a couple of weeks ago. And it was like when you're doing expository preaching, like there is a line that exists between where are you walking into a seminary class as a part of Sunday morning. In other words, it really boils down to, and I would call it the balance between preaching and teaching. And so, a lot of times people will say that a teacher tells it and a preacher yells it, and we have a good laugh over that. But biblically, there is a difference between those two. And so the teaching is literally, it is that exposition. It is that knowing that this word is past tense or aorist tense, and then how does that apply to the text itself? Hermeneutical principles, the actual studying the word. But then there's always that preaching element involved as well. And the preaching is the exhortation. You can give somebody a ton of Bible facts, but if there is no lifting up or motivation, if you want to use that word, the part where that's where the pulpit really becomes alive and different than just a Bible study itself, to try and get somebody to go and not just hear this message, but, the part where you go and live it out in your own life. And that's the difficult on like a Sunday morning, because you don't want to just hit people with facts, but you're always looking for this balance. But sometimes in the midst of that, that's the hard part. Matthew 24, I've said it over and over. This is, I'll be honest, like I can remember in my own struggle, and part of me doing this video is conveying that. Like I can remember coming to God's sovereignty. And this being like around my house, I drove my wife crazy while coming and working out in my own life like God's sovereignty. And I have no idea. It was an ordeal. It was time. It was, if you ask my wife, every conversation somewhere came back to the sovereignty of God. And there was this place where, I don't think anybody starts out anywhere. And like, even for me, it's like, I can remember that point where I began to grasp God's sovereignty clarified itself for me, because at some point you begin to grasp just how big God is and how little you are. And somewhere in the midst of that, the sovereignty and those kind of things, it starts to clarify itself. Well, Matthew 24 in my life and my marriage, one of those same things, like you can ask my wife for a long time now, like these discussions have been taking place, and like my viewpoints and where I am within it change. You could go back and find the message where we did like a 4-night revelation thing 4 years ago. I always say we did it for no other reason so that people would stop putting an S on revelation. John's revelation, singular. And I went through, and it's funny. Part of me wants to take it down because I went through, and it's a very strong premillennial. And if you're watching this video, I'll try and make that part of this a very futurist reading of the text, and I didn't allow for anything else. And to be quite transparent, it's more where I fell. And as much as I've tried to keep my now opinions out of Matthew 24, in the end, you cannot help but put it in there to some extent. And so, like, for me, yeah, I'm definitely changing in my views of everything. And somebody might be, like, why would you change? And it's like, well, it's more time spent in the word itself. It's not due to other voices or things of that nature. It is literally, it's funny because I'm still like, typically my listening preferences scripturally still tend to lean in the same directions. But my own study, though, my own time in the Word, it's changed and it's reshaped. It's reshaped a lot of me. And going into Matthew 24, part of what I want to do is maybe take this step back and make it more seminary, make it more looking at the text, much more teaching, less preaching, because for a lot of you, like 5 minutes in, you're probably, if you don't care anything about futurism, covenant theology, premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, if that stuff doesn't interest you, you know, the Message Sunday was exactly then the great message to have. But if there is that other part of you, though, and I have no idea how long this message is, what it'll be, or 1 or 2 parts. But if you are interested and like you've heard these terms, you want to know more about it, let's go through Matthew 24 and kind of look at it in those sense. So before we can go very far in Matthew 24, and I'm not going back through starting at verse 1, even though you know there's that part of me that definitely does want to do that. You know, you got to remember the context. And I feel like when we're getting into these Matthew 24 discussions, you know, people, they skip right to verse 32 or they jump right in and they begin discussions there. And you can't. There is no jumping in there. You've got to go all the way back to what Jesus had been doing. And that was in the temple, and that was preaching in the temple. And then the most amazing thing is in chapter 24, verse 1, it opens with, and Jesus went out and departed the temple. And even just saying those words, you would casually end up being inclined to say, is like, well, he left the building. Well, it was a lot more than that. It's about like in the Old Testament when Ichabod was pronounced over something. When Jesus was saying he left, it was actually like the very presence of God departing yet again from the temple. That's why this was big. It wasn't him pronouncing judgment when he left the temple, but he was confirming the judgment that the Jewish people were already under. And you might end up saying, well, Jason, that's harsh. And it's like, well, no, that's just the reality of it. As the breeze is kicking up out here right now. That's just the realities of it at this point. And so Jesus went out of the temple, and then you start to read Mark and Luke, and you put it all together here with Matthew as well. But you can tell what happened is, as they're leaving the temple, as they're departing, some of his disciples were literally, Peter, James, John, and Andrew were literally like, Jesus, you know, turn around, look back. You're on the hillside kind of overlooking the city, and the most amazing thing would have been the temple. And they were, for them, it was like, look at this amazing thing. Like, there's nothing, this is one of the wonders of the world, is this temple. And they're literally asking Jesus, like, hey, ain't it amazing? And you can tell Jesus's heart leading into Matthew 24 is like, you guys, you're not getting anything that I'm saying, are you? It's like, I've taught physics going on 28 years. Trust me, I get exactly where this is. Like, I keep talking, but I'm not entirely convinced you're listening. And so that's why Jesus goes in and he says, not one stone will be left upon another. Jesus literally tells them that building is going to the ground. It will be torn down to the ground. And it wasn't just the building, but it was this entire religious, and how about this at this point, false religious system. The Judaism that God had ordained, that's not what was there anymore. They had replaced the worship of God with some other worship of whatever it was they were worshiping, ultimately, basically themselves and their own righteousness. And modern Judaism is the same today. It's not a worship of God. It's still a worship of man, just dressed up with a set of rules by which you feel good about yourself. Don't sit there and suppose it to be anything different. Jesus is saying it's going down. Everything's coming down. The building, the system. I know you think it's amazing, but it's all coming to the ground. So then the natural response, and this is why this is so good, the natural response by the disciples then is like, when? Good question, right? When? And this is when everybody jumps into, oh, they're asking when the world ends. And it's like, well, no, that's not really the context of this at all to begin a discussion. Now, do you want to put it in terms of like when the world ends for them? Because like I could see in a very localized sense, like this is the center of the world as they know it. This city, this temple, this is the center of the world. But yet they weren't looking at a broad scale event happening 2,000 or 3,000 years in the future. For them, the most important thing was what they were literally looking at the time. And now this is where we start getting into. So does Matthew 24, is it, some people are going to read, it is entirely into the past. And then others are like, well, there's just a little snippet maybe that's past, and everything else is some great future, great tribulation that's going to happen. And then maybe some people kind of do like a little layered idea. And quite honestly, it's all over the place, and it's one reason I'm making this video, because I'm thinking maybe one day my own kids will be sitting here going, well, Dad, which one is it out of all these things? And so the best way would be just to kind of continue what we're doing. And again, you set the tone and what their question is. And it's interesting, they ask the question, is when is this happening? And it's very honest. Now, does Jesus just answer the temple? And could we say then that Jesus is giving us a little preview? That's perfectly fine to say as well. But in the most direct sense, though, we're taking a look at what's going on in their life. And this is when Jesus, and I love it because the first thing he says is, take heed that no one deceives you. Because when it comes to, quote, the end of the world, whether it be this entire world or it's the end of the world as you know it, the first thing Jesus says is be careful, because deception is going to be everywhere at this point. Whenever things get tough, whenever there's panic, if there's one thing I know, whenever there's panic, whenever there's confusion, it's always an opportunity for someone to take advantage of it. And Jesus then goes on to tell them there'll be wars and rumors of wars and all of these things, and earthquakes and pestilences. And you sit here and look at it, and if we go straight in a very close sense to following Jesus, yeah, absolutely. All those things are taking place. And then at the same time, there's that little part of you, and it's like, well, we've always been sick. There's always wars and rumors of wars. There's always earthquakes. There's always disease. There's all these, and we see like almost like these little pictures all the way through time. And again, I'm not answering your questions right now, because can we paint the case for the immediate time of Jesus seeing all this? Yeah. And then at the same time, we see a lot of this that continues today. And Jesus then goes on to say, many will be offended. They'll betray each other, hate one another. I love it when you read Luke. Luke just calls it. He's like, yeah, your mama and your daddy are going to turn against you. Your brother is going to turn against you. The people you thought that you could count on, the people you thought that loved you, things will be such that people will betray you. For what? For what you believe, for the things that you stand for, people will stand against you. Well, does this happen in their time? Yep. But then there's that little part of you, does it happen today? Absolutely. These things still stand up. And then verse 11 talked about many false prophets again, and lawlessness, and love will grow cold. It's like people abandon the heart of what it is to be human. And again, did we see it then? Do we see it now? Absolutely. People begin to miss out on the very essence of what it is to be a human, and even how we treat each other. But then that's why 14 was so big, and the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a witness to the nations. And so there's Jesus saying that even in the worst of the bad times, the gospel's not going to stop. Once again, does that apply to where they were? 100%. And even today, the things that are happening in this world, like you can, like even in my life, you can turn on me, but here's going to be the one thing, sir, I'm not going to stop preaching the gospel. I'm not going to stop preaching that Jesus saves. Every week at church, we're going to keep telling people the good news. We're going to keep passing out tracts, and we're going to keep talking about it. So all that boiled into then verse 15, which is where I've kind of talked about for the last couple of weeks. And this is where it gets real good, because then Jesus says, therefore, again, the therefore ties back to everything, the betrayals, everything that we literally just saw at this point. People turning against each other, the wars, the rumors of wars, the pestilences, all of this. And Jesus says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, Matthew interjects, whoever reads, let them understand. Guys, we could have spent an entire week on that verse alone when we were going through this, because then all of a sudden we're going back to Daniel. Jesus uses this term, abomination of desolation. And you think about abomination, this is something that's beyond what we can conceive as abhorrent to God. That's other things being set up in the place of God, something the likes of which the world has not seen. And so instantly when we do that, for them, and I went through this in other messages, but this is where we would go back to the time of the Maccabees. You could read in the book of Maccabees if you have your King James 1611, still with the Apocrypha in there, and you can actually read of some of the events of this time. Antiochus Epiphanes coming in, slaughtering a hog in the holy place of God, and definitely an abomination, and everything that went on. And most people would have probably saw this. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, like they would have thought, oh yeah, we've already seen that. And Jesus is giving a sense, is like, you saw a picture of this abomination in the past, and now Jesus is basically saying, and you're going to see this again. And, hopefully if you're watching this, you've already familiarized yourself. Maybe you've watched the other messages that we've done on this, but by 70 AD, after Jesus is already passed in his earthly sense, this is when there is a Jewish rebellion, and Rome marches, I think, 60,000 troops to Jerusalem. And of course, it's not like it just straight to Jerusalem. They march all the way through Israel, Judea, this area. And of course, it's devastation the entire way. It's just, it reaches a final frenzied finish in the town of Jerusalem itself. And out here, man, even my chickens are getting stirred up over this one. And the bloodbath then that takes place, oh yeah, 1.1 million Jews die. You've got women willing to eat their children in order to stay alive. The things that happened in 70 AD, I do that in like the very first video I did. Go back and watch it if you would. We spend a lot of time, but I do that because I don't feel like in most churches we respect 70 AD. When Rome marched on Jerusalem, like, we cannot begin to grasp how bad the bad is in that sense. Like, I think we take it for granted. We read books like Revelation, and we instantly then begin to discount that could have anything to do with the saying, oh, this sounds terrible. There's never been anything like any of this. And it's like, well, for the people who make arguments the other way, yeah, there's actually been some really bad apocalyptic events happen, especially when it comes to the Jewish people themselves. And so 70 AD, again, like, you can't imagine being in a city, being surrounded. You're running out of food, running out of water. It's just death and death and death, and a little bit more death that's taking place at this point. And so eventually the Temple Mount itself falls, and you've got Roman soldiers marching through the very holy place of God. Is this an abomination? Yeah. Does this mean that then, all right, so if Daniel spoke of an abomination in 167 BC, and then here we are in 70 AD, another abomination, does this mean there will never be another abomination to exist again? And and I'm going to be the first one to say, I think churches are full of abominations still. Now, this term holy place, even I loosely said in one message, we can't just throw holy place onto our churches today. We're kind of, I mean, God lives within us now. Like, we don't have to go to a place. Now, I'm still going to sit here and say our churches are special. We need to take care of our churches, and we need to think about how we behave inside of a church, but we don't need to confuse a church with a holy place. Yet at the same time, when we think about places that we set aside for God, yeah, abominations in some shape, form, get online. You can sit here and watch the abhorrent messages being preached in a lot of churches that, like, it boom, blows my mind. LGBTQ anthems being played inside the churches, just things that, again, abhorrent to God. And does it mean that maybe still one day there could be another? So another end times view then would be to say that eventually a temple will be built, wait for it, again in Jerusalem, and sacrifices will begin again. And this is an end times view. Between you and me and the 3 chickens in the yard, if we sat here and went through that, you're really stretching. And I'm sorry, I've got an analytical brain. My background science and physics. I'll look at what the text says, and to be honest, you're really stretching it to have to make that case. In fact, parts of it doesn't 100% make sense. But could there be a world religion, maybe a resurgence even of Christianity one day, and within that you begin to see things go completely off the rails and abomination? Yeah, however it works out, there's a lot of options. It doesn't say that in the future you can't still continue to have abominations now and have abominations maybe something once again the world has never seen. Now, verse 16, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Him who is on the housetop not go down, take anything out of his house. Him who's in the field not go back to get his clothes. And Jesus makes it. And now then you notice, he explicitly says Judea. So we begin to now take this and move this just to a future event. And you're like, he's talking about people in an area where Rome is going to march. And he's literally saying, guys, when you hear literally Rome is marching, you need to get out of town. And it's amazing, when things get bad, you find out what's more important. And I've said this many times in the messages over the last couple of weeks. For most people, it's stuff. In most people's life, stuff still has more sway over them than even the love of their family. And Jesus is quite frankly saying at this point, when things get bad, a lot of times you can find out what most people hold to be the most important. Jesus says when things get this bad, there's nothing more important than your family. Forget about your stuff. You just need to be getting out of town at this point. You need to, and again, the word flee, I mean, he's literally saying you need to run. And then Jesus goes on to say, but woe to those who are pregnant, nursing baby in those days. Pray that your flight not be on the winter on the Sabbath. And so here is Jesus literally saying, when judgment falls, there's going to be innocent people caught in the midst of it. And as unfortunate as it is, it's also a reality of it. One of the things you're going to see here is not Jesus saying that Christians even will be excused from the bad that's going to happen. You will go on to see Jesus tries to limit the scope of what's going to happen, but it doesn't mean that Christians are excused. And I'll be the first one to say it, and we're about to be there unless those days were shortened. I'll be the first one to say I love the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture. I love that idea. I love, and again, this is another end times view. And what I'm trying to do within this video is try and make it clear. It's like you can still be Christians, brothers and sisters, and have different views of the end. If you've got the person of Jesus Christ right, if you've got salvation correct, I think it was Alistair Begg I once heard preach. He said, the plain things are the main things, and the main things are the plain things. And so people get trapped in these Matthew 24 things, and you have churches divide. For that matter, you have families divide over this issue because of their end times theories. And That for me is just incredibly unfortunate. And so that's why I'm trying to keep it balanced as we go through all the messages so far, and even into this one that I've come out here in the yard to do today. But one of the things you see is, again, I would love for this idea of a pre-tribulation rapture. I'd love for, uh, hey, I'm all in favor of it. But if you're asking, can I promise that as a Christian, you're going to be spared some ultimate bad things that are going to be? I'm sorry, I can't give you like that assurance that you're not going to have to go through some things in this world. Matter of fact, chances are, if you're wearing skin, again, you already know what it's like to go through some pretty bad things at this time. So there's no indications with any of this that just because we're Christian, we get a get out of jail free pass in the future. We Because we see God's heart here is like he's lamenting in those verses over the pregnant and the nursing babies and the time of year, because he knows some people are going to get, when judgment falls, there's going to be some other people trapped up within that judgment. And so then verse 21, which becomes a hinge point for a lot of end times things. For then there will be a great tribulation. And so now, boom, is this a great tribulation in the sense of like 70 AD, that this was the greatest tribulation there ever was, and there will never be anything like it? Because read, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor shall ever be. Which is interesting because this language is in Daniel as well, and some people would then apply it to past events have occurred. And now it gets real. This is where it gets difficult. So let's go through what this could be. So this great tribulation, is Jesus talking specifically about 70 AD? Is Jesus talking? It's hard to talk with a rooster crowing behind you randomly. But is Jesus talking specifically about 70 AD? Or is this great tribulation now a future great tribulation? Or, hold on, let's get crazy, is it both at the same time? Because the language itself, and this is what I want to get to you, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor shall ever be. Guys, when you start getting into apocalyptic language, and I know that if some people watch this, they would already be leaving me hate text, and I feel like most of the hate text is going to become because most people would be into this because they want to find somebody that just agrees with them, and they don't want to look or listen to somebody that, I can say quite honestly, for me, a lot of this has been me going through for me and not wanting to have somebody else lay their trips or their views on top of me at this point. So a lot of people will see this great tribulation as 70 AD, and then some people will be like, well, that's a picture of a great tribulation, but one day there's going to be a singular great tribulation, and that's where you'll hear like the Left Behind movies and things like that coming into place, a 7-year period of time in which, the apocalypse basically is taking place. I'm really feel compelled to chase that chicken. Chicken's driving me bonkers right now. Barnyard theology, man. God bless y'all for hanging out with me at this point. But, here's the thing. When we look back through this, what we can say, though, is something's going to happen. It's uniquely catastrophic. Remember, though, the context. Jesus was just asked when this temple falls. So before we start preaching everything is some big future event, guys, you got to kind of ground yourself back into where this is landing in their world. And I don't think it's some event 3,000 years in the future is where they're falling as much right now, is they're looking at what's happening in their little world. And now Jesus says, and unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. And once again, there, I've said it a moment ago, but there's not like here a talk of Christians being spared. It's that Christians being limited to just what they're exposed to in the first place. And that's God's good grace and God's love. because God's describing an event that's so bad that if it were allowed to continue, no one, notice it's no flesh, that no one, lost, saved, those who elect are chosen by God, there wouldn't be anyone that could actually survive this event. All right, so then verse 23, which was actually where I wanted to get to 30 minutes into this message, but we're fine. Then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ. So now look, here is this apocalyptic type event. Is it 70 AD? Is it future? Is it both? But Jesus says, then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there, do not believe it. And again, when things get desperate, it's easier to fool people. When times get tough, people are more likely to fall for anything at this point. This is the reason why I like the prosperity preachers on the TV. They do such a great job at what they do. Good grief, I live in Alabama. We've got prosperity churches here. And a lot of times it's your poorest people are the ones suckered in because they're desperate. They're so desperate, they're willing to give whatever money they have left because they believe that maybe they're going to be financially blessed if they get rid of every last asset they own. And guys, people become vulnerable when they're desperate. The end. People become vulnerable whenever they feel desperate. And Jesus is quite simply saying, hey guys, don't be fooled. For false Christs and false prophets will rise. It's funny, the worse things get, the better. I love the word will rise because it's social media 101. The worse things get, the easier it is for people whose voices probably should not be getting listened to. Guys, this is true in politics. This is true, you name it. But the worse things become, the easier it is for voices that you have no business listening to get louder and louder, and the influence grows and grows. And so Jesus says false Christs, false prophets will rise and will show great signs and wonders. And I can't say it, this is extraordinary type things to deceive, if possible, even the elect. In other words, these people are going to make such a great show of themselves that they're going to be able to even confuse those that God has chosen out. And I keep saying that, well, Jason, you seem to be really jumping on this chosen thing. Hey man, I'm reading the text. If you don't like it, I'm just reading what God is saying, and Jesus is the one using this language right now. When you see elect, it means chosen. Can't help you. That's just what the word says. And so here Jesus, though, is trying to show you the depth of how horrible this is and this deception is, that even those that are the elect of God could even almost, doesn't say they will be deceived, but almost. Well, here's the thing, if the elect can almost be deceived, then you can pretty much guarantee that those otherwise are going to fall for it, hook, line, and sinker. And guys, here's the thing, churches, even today, this is true then because they had tons of false Christs. They had tons of false messiahs. Going into 70 AD, we can roll back there once again. Yeah, they had tons of people saying, I'm the Messiah. No, I'm the Messiah. We have people today. David Koresh was out in Waco, Texas. He's the Messiah. I'll give you a hint. If the Messiah says they want to sleep with your wife, you should probably find another church because that's not the Messiah. But anyway, just throwing that one out there. But people like a good show. People like to go to churches with where there's productions. Sunday morning is a show. Maybe where you've got, this is why people like to go to a church where the preacher goes up there and swings his jacket and hails everybody, hallelujah, all at once. And, all the backaches are healed in the church and people are rolling around, and people look at people rolling in the floor and think, oh man, the Spirit must be moving in this place. Oh man, this church has a Congo line moving on. The Spirit must be moving in this place. I used at church yesterday, I talked about like churches with gold dust falling from the ceiling or money appearing out of the there's money falling out of the ceiling right now. And people, oh, God must really be here. You want to see evidence of God? Now, I admit, I saw a great video of a guy pew running the other day, and it's like, and I mean, that dude was stepping on the backs. It was truly amazing. Yeah, that's garbage. You can shamalama ding dong all you want. It's garbage. You want to see the evidence. You want to know what Christ looks like. Look for a changed life. Look for somebody in their life that was bent on hell, and now they're bent on the things of God. Somebody that used to seek out just themselves, and now they seek out God's love for their family. You want to stop looking for cheap signs of Christ. You want to see Christ's presence. Look at how somebody begins to live their life when God's truly guiding in and they've changed that individual. Man, I'll be honest, I could probably run at the church right now. I could probably practice my pew running. That tells you absolutely nothing about my heart. But when you see how I live my life, and you see how I love my family, and you see how I love others, you begin to see God has changed the man. That's the presence of God. Don't be enthused because you saw some cheap show somewhere. And then Jesus says, I've told you beforehand. Guys, I've already warned you. And I know we're at 36 minutes. I'm just rolling for an hour. I figure if you're watching this, you're just in for the long haul on this one. I may lose my voice talking out here in the yard, but this is it. Jesus is intentionally trying to paint you a picture of things getting bad, maybe then, maybe now, and most importantly, he's asking who's going to be faithful to the very end. That's the question in all this, is who's going to stay faithful in spite of the rest of the world going crazy. And now he says, verse 26, therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. If he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. There's always going to be somebody has a secret message from the God. They know something about God, nobody else. Guys, Cult 101 are people that have these secrets that have to do with God. Even today, you find, what was the cussing pastor's name? Good, I forgot his name. I don't even care anymore. The Mars Hills guy. I mean, he's got things figured out of God that nobody else has got figured out of God. So you need to, let me tell you something. Anybody that thinks they've got some secret about God figured out that ain't nobody figured out in the last 2,000 years, there's your first indication that person is out to deceive you. I've talked for 37 minutes, and to be honest, even I'll have to be, I pray that, like, again, I hope somebody watching this, I hope my kids, they're gaining something that goes beyond Bible statistics here, and that somewhere in the midst of all this, they see that Jesus is once again giving a pastoral message that's not just good for 70 AD, but it's good for 2026. And if God should continue to tarry, it's good for 2100 or 2200 or 3100, because I don't know what the timing of God is. And now verse 27. And now this is where it gets really hard for those that are watching this and they're like trying to really disseminate every verse. 27's where, because right now it is very easy. We can paint the last 26 verses for someone who's a preterist and they are making this argument for 70 AD. Boom. It's all very nicely fits. And then we get to verse 27 and the preterist argument begins to get a little harder. And so verse 27 says, for as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered. And every time we see this word, parousia, this coming of the Son of Man, we saw it at the very beginning of the chapter. I meant to talk about it again. It's always this difficult thing because coming does not necessarily mean coming as in, thank you very much, I'll be here all week. It doesn't necessarily define as a visible coming. Now, one of the things the church holds, and I've done that in other messages, the church still holds a very, and this is what separates the preterist and the futurist from like the hyper preterist or the whatever the other terms are there, because there are those who believe that Jesus did already come back, boom, and there is no future coming back. And I don't want to talk down towards anybody, but when you take that viewpoint that Jesus has come back and it's already been done, you kind of stand against 2,000 years of church, which now we're in that little world of you figured out a little secret knowledge that nobody else knows. And literally Jesus would even be inclined to say you might not necessarily want to listen to that one. But I even get though that viewpoint of the somebody that is the hyper preterist at that point. So what is this coming of the Son of Man? Because sometimes coming literally means a physical, visible coming, just like we'd see in Acts chapter 1 that Paul talks about. Sometimes, though, I don't know why I said Paul in that case. That's not Paul, that's Luke. But anyway, sometimes we see coming in that sense, but other times coming can refer to a judgment type event, as in judgment is coming. And so here's the thing, for when the lightning comes from the east and the west, so this is one of two things. Somebody can take this very clearly to say this is the coming in judgment. And here's what the lightning from east to west does mean. It means whatever this is something that's you can't miss. In other words, it's not literally having to say that you will see lightning. It's saying that the things surrounding what's taking place are such that it cannot be missed. Again, you got to get into the grasp of apocalyptic literature here. That's like when you read Revelation, you start reading about the beast and the other things and 7 heads and 7 diadems. You've got to know a little bit about the nature of the text itself before the next thing you know, you got a 7-headed dragon walking around on the earth at some point. And literally, that's where some people have ended up. So here's what we understand. Was this a physical coming of Christ in 70 AD? Or is this talking about a future literal physical coming of Christ? Or is this a coming of Christ in judgment circa 70 AD at this point? And I'll be completely honest, I can sit here and I could literally say, you pick your side, I'll pick the other side, and we could have a fine argument for it. Or maybe we could even say it's both. Maybe that when judgment falls like it did on them, it's incredibly visible to see judgment. Because look at what comes next. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Guys, that verse is pretty great, because what's actually being inferred within that verse is, like, for example, if you see a bunch of buzzards circling over in the distance around something, you pretty much know something dead is underneath that big circling of the buzzards. Jesus is saying the same thing. When judgment has fallen, and I'll give you a hint, 70 AD, you had 1 million people dead. When the judgment of God has fallen, you want to think you saw buzzards carrying? Yeah, in 70 AD, I can't even begin to imagine, because they couldn't have buried everybody. So you can imagine seeing the birds eat the dead bodies left behind from the great warfare that had been taking place at this point. God's saying, when Jesus is saying, when judgment falls, you can't miss it. And now this is where even then I'd pause for a second and be like, it 100% applied there. And for us today to even begin to think that there will never be another great judgment, I would say you are probably quite mistaken if you're living today thinking, I'm sure there'll never be any type of judgments fall, the severity of which fell then. Guys, I look at America, and if anybody is ripe for judgment, we're ripe for judgment right now. Verse number 29 at this point. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And so now then this is where people then will grasp and be like, aha! cannot be 70 AD because look at this stuff. The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, stars fall from heaven. Hey, that's a pretty big deal. If something like that had happened, you would have probably have seen it. And then the response is going to be at that point, not so fast. Guys, here's the thing. That's apocalyptic language. Once again, it's like a seven-headed beast. You see this language like this for tribulation. It's in Ezekiel, Isaiah, Joel. This is a very common type of Old Testament thing where you see this language and it's painting a picture of a truly horrible type of event. Something that, once again, judgments come, you can't miss. Does this absolutely fall on 70 AD? 100%. What's funny for those that try and make this like an entire 70 AD event at this point, you'll actually see some people in this case, they'll even link, all right, but Halley's Comet came in 66. I like how the people that try and make this an entirely past thing will start really grasping for things. And literally that Halley's Comet 66 AD will be somebody's idea of like what fits into this when they're trying to fit everything into the past. Somebody with a futurist idea will be trying to put everything into the future and say, and to be you and me, it's just friends, right? 46 minutes. We got to be friends or you wouldn't be listening to this anymore. Here's the thing that really falls more than anything here. Guys, it's apocalyptic language. Once again, it's not so much literal darkening of the sun, literal falling of stars from heaven. The implication here is judgment coming in such a way that you absolutely cannot miss the presence of God and his judgment, whether this is Jesus walking physically, visibly, or Jesus just the judgment taking place. Either way it goes, it's something you can't miss. And now look in verse number 30. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And once again, this is where somebody will say, nobody saw Jesus riding on a cloud in 70 AD, therefore this has to be in the future. And then, unfortunately, then I'll be the one that has to kind of come back on the other side of that. This language coming in clouds is, go back to Daniel again, Daniel chapter 7. This is, once again, a picture of heavenly judgment. It doesn't necessarily mean that this has to be Jesus riding on a cloud at this point. We didn't get into all that church yesterday just because of the depth and complexity in all this. But what you can tell is we can hold this either way. Is this a future event of Jesus coming that we're speaking, or is this a 70 AD? Is this judgment, or however this works? Guys, here's what I do understand, and that's what is here. Whether it was in 70 AD or 2070 AD, when people see their mistake in having rejected Jesus Christ, there will be exceedingly great amounts of mourning at that point, because people will begin to see whether this is literal Jesus or the judgment that has fallen due to their rejection. People will begin to see it, and they will begin to understand that they have rejected life itself. And so that's what's amazing. We're in another verse that holds up perfectly well to the past. It holds up perfectly well to the present, and it holds up even into the future. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to another. And so this is where, and I'm trying to do this with every verse, talk about the different viewpoints. So for some people say, well, this is what began when the church was first started, and we are actually living out this moment right now. This divine, the trumpet literally just means a warning or a divine announcement. Guys, what we do in church every week, we issue a divine announcement. Christ is coming. You'd better be ready. And so for some people, they will now put this as this is something that began back in the days of the disciples and is continuing today. And then some people will take this and put it at some point in the future before a final return in a gathering, or maybe it's both. It's from then and it will continue each and every day, because look at what he's saying. The angels, they will together his elect, the chosen. Again, stop getting mad about it. This is Jesus talking here. And together his elect from the four winds, and it just means God's people are going to be grabbed from all four corners of the world. Every place where God's people are at, they're going to be brought in. Guys, here's the thing. God's numbered his people, and God's not going to miss anybody. Whether you want to throw this to a past event where this gathering has started, or a future type event, or if you want to say that this has been taking place and is taking place even to this very day, you get the very sense that there is because look at what he says, from one end of heaven to the other, you see a very universal, this isn't just an Israel thing for the moment, but you see a worldwide type of gathering at this point. And then Jesus says, now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you will know that summer is near. Guys, sometimes, Jesus takes the most simple things. Like, it's amazing, like the apple trees behind me. Like, you can watch videos of me sitting out here through the winter, and, there's not a single leaf anywhere back here behind me. And then at other times, you can sit here and, you see like the foliage here. And then the most amazing things, there are some times of the year you can begin to see the buds start to form. And when you see the buds start to form, you know that something is on the way. And Jesus is sitting here pointing to transitions that take place. And Jesus saying, you can see the evidence of these transitions. You know that something is approaching. Do not be so dumb as you do not have discernment. Wow. Do you need discernment to know that you will one day cease to be as you know it in this place? Well, is that a message that holds true just for then? Does it hold true for today? And does it hold true for tomorrow? And I'm sitting here, discernment is one of those things that kind of is needed in every season of life. For you to live your life unaware. And, and I think that was one of those things for me. I had enough before I got saved. I had enough knowledge that, like, my testimony was literally Pastor Daryl Jones asking me, is like, if you died right now, would you go to heaven or hell? And there was enough about me in which I was able to say, Pastor, I'm going to hell, and I don't want to. I did not live my life in such unawareness that I did not understand what I deserve for the way that I had been living at this point. Jesus brings us back out here that you need to have discernment, because you can see that there is an end. Is it 70 AD, 2026, 2070? There is an end. So also when you see all these things, notice, see all these, guys, this is everything that we've been talking about. So when you see, I love this because now Jesus is making application. When you see all these things, know that it is, what is it? Is this the second coming, as we call it in the church? Is this judgment is coming? Is this the kingdom is coming? Guys, here's the thing. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter, but there is something coming, and you had better be ready for it. Doesn't mean you have to be obsessed of it and watch 400 videos on YouTube about the apocalypse, but you need to be awake. You need to be discerning, and you need to be ready, is the point that Jesus is making. This, whatever is going to happen, again, was this true for then? Yep. Is this true for now? Yep. Will it be true for my children should the Lord tarry? Absolutely. Jesus is saying it is near, it is at the doors. Jesus is talking about you need to be ready, because you do not know how much time you have left. One thing, and this was my big bring home from church yesterday, the one thing I can tell you that all those people in Jerusalem, as it was surrounded, who ignored Christ, If they would have got this warning, they would have fled. They would have gotten out of the town. I can guarantee you that every single person in that city wished they had more time to make things right before Rome come. I can guarantee you that even today, there are going to be people die today, tonight, as I speak, and they're all going to be wishing they had more time and would have listened to Jesus' warning to get ready within this text. Verse 34 and verse 34 is where everything bursts wide open. Churches split, families part ways, nobody can get along. Jesus says, assuredly, that means, boys, you can count on what I'm about to say. I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. What are all these things? Well, it kind of looks a lot like everything he's just been talking about. Earthquakes, the pestilences. I'm getting ready. It sounds like rain might be about to come on me. I might have to retreat. Everything that Jesus says is going to happen. Everything that Jesus says is going to happen is going to happen. So now we're left here for a moment. This is where everything begins to split and come to pieces. It's on this generation. Because now some people are going to say that this generation is, better run a little faster. Yep, there we go. Have to do a little standing now. Some people are now going to say that this generation is that generation that Jesus is talking to. And between you and me and the golf cart I'm propped on right now, it's probably absolutely the strongest reading of this text. Because the word that's used for generation here, hey, don't shoot the messenger, but the word here that's used to describe generation always refers to that generation. Now, some people will begin to take this and be like, Jesus is talking about a future generation. When everything happens one day in the future, it will happen in a generation in the future. Some people will say that when things begin to happen, the world falls apart within a single generation. And so, which one is it? Jesus is talking about a collapse of a society. And Jesus begins to say that within this generation, you're going to see this entire world come unglued. And was he right? Yep. Now, this is when somebody then begins, what about the coming in the cloud? Yeah, we've already talked about that. That doesn't necessarily mean like physically riding clouds. What about the part about the stars falling from heaven? That's Halley's Comet, right? Yeah, that even doesn't necessarily mean literal stars falling from heaven. Here's what's the most amazing part about this. Everything here falls into that generation. And at the same time, every single warning falls on my generation. And every single warning still falls upon my children's generation. That if you do not heed the very words of Jesus, then what comes next is judgment. And if you won't learn from their generation, then I guess this generation is destined to repeat the mistakes of their generation. See, the atheists take this verse and they build it as to why you can't trust the Bible. Guys, I would say it's the exact opposite. You can trust the Bible because of what happened to that generation. Hold on to something. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Even within that very moment, Jesus lays it out. This isn't just a word of warning for them. It's a word of warning for every single person that ever will be. Because every generation, I closed with this yesterday, every generation is going to have something. Every generation is going to go through something. But the question is, are you prepared for what comes next? Instead of arguing and dividing churches over this text, maybe it should be us pulling aside and saying that there is judgment, there was judgment, there will be judgment, and as the church, we should be preparing people so that they know how to live when that judgment falls. Because you will either be with Christ or you will be against him. Guys, in a nutshell, as the bottom falls out, and I'll probably be in this chicken house for the next 30 minutes watching the rainfall, I can say I love you. If you watched one solid hour of this, God bless you. If my kids are watching this one day, know something, that your dad loves you very much. And your dad, more than anything, wants to make sure you're ready for whatever should come and fall in your life. Because every one of us need to be ready for what comes next. Love you guys. Bye.